home games. Thanks for being with us. That is Rick Zamperin down below in the blue shirt from 900 CHML Radio. Beside him, Bubba O'Neill from CHCH TV Sports. On the top row, Steve Milton from the Hamilton Spectator. I'm Scott Radley from the Hamilton Spectator and 900 CHML. And Rick, last week, Mike Babcock was doing an interview with Christine Simpson from Sportsnet. Kind of the Mike Babcock explain yourself tour, because he has there's been criticism of what he's done. There's been shots at him from former players. And as you listen to his answers, and a lot of people will have, and if you haven't, you can go back and watch their stories online. You can, for background, hit pause right now and then go watch and then come back to us. The question is, are some of the things that Mike Babcock has been accused of or criticized for, were they just coaching things that were the way things were done for a long time, and Mike Babcock is being criticized unfairly for coaching the way coaches coached, and he's just the guy who's getting hammered? Or was Mike Babcock out of line a lot of times and is now just trying to explain away bad behavior?
I think it's a bit of both, to be honest. I don't think there's one coach in the history of the NHL, at least, and maybe even other leagues out there, whether it's the AHL or European Hockey League, where they have to try different tactics with different players. Not every player is the same. Not every coach is the same. And they have to try, somehow to get the most out of their players. Has he owned a bit of it? Yeah. Has he completely owned, some of the things he's been accused of? No, because obviously it does take two to tango. The Johan Franzen situation and in the bullying, we weren't in the room, but was there a case of, him being a bully to try to get Franzen to play the best that he could? Perhaps, probably. I wouldn't put it past Babcock or any other coach to try and be that kind of forceful entity to, in a playoff format or a regular season game or a Stanley Cup final to get the most out of that individual. Obviously, it didn't work with Johan because he didn't appreciate the way that Babs went about doing it. The Mitch Marner, Tyler Bozak situation, he says he owns it. He says he should have done it a different way. He's apologized. So I want to believe him to a certain extent, but he's not completely off the hook. As I said, there's two to tango, and he should share a lot of the blame.
Guys, I'm in a sweet spot in my career where, I went almost a decade being at almost every single Maple Leaf home game practices when I was working for another network, and where I was at CHCH as well too. So I have a real good feel for this, in my opinion. So I actually saw Paul Maurice. It would have been Babs. Would have been, trying to think of who else, Randy Carlisle and Paul Maurice. So those are the four coaches in that period of times I was there. And it's real interesting, especially as members of the media, to see how they treat people, how they answer questions, in times of winning and times of losing. And each four of them had their different styles. And I would say this of Mike Babcock: a control freak. You could just tell by the way he spoke to us and the way he answered questions that, at times, and I'll tell you, Ron Wilson was another guy that was a bit of a jerk as well too. I'm not holding back on that. He really was. Babs is a guy that I think is trapped in the wrong time for his coaching style, because for the first half of his coaching style and the majority of his coaching style, you could dictate to players, talk to players in a certain way. Times have changed and the athletes are different, and you need to respond to them differently. We heard Bergevin talking about this too, about a guy like Julian, the way he talked to his players and when the Deschamps talked to his players. It's a different type of vibe. It's a different approach. And Babs is a bully, right? He is a bully. There's no doubt about it. And the Franzen thing is obviously true. And there are too many big name players over this time since he was fired by the Maple Leafs that spoke out about the man. And you have to believe his tactics were just not modern. And this is why this is happening to him.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in what you're saying there, Bubs. I don't pretend to know Mike Babcock. I've gone to a lot of scrums with him, but I haven't had the one-on-one alone time with him that I've had with previous Leafs and Sabres coaches. And so it's hard to get to the core of what the philosophy is, because they don't always tell us and those kinds of things. But you can go by the shieldedness and the defensiveness and the attack and those kinds of things. But you're right. I think not only have times have changed, they changed very, very quickly in Mike Babcock's time, and he had a team like that. There's a bit more empowerment of players by themselves in the NHL now. After all these years, there's a little bit more of it, and you can see it on the Toronto Maple Leafs with those young players, and that didn't exist, and it really happened in a hurry, within the Leaf organization compared to previous things. Part of that because of the people who are above Babcock running it, right? They're of that nature too. So you're 100% right, Mike. Of course, anybody's going to try and I find it funny if he didn't defend himself, right? Or if you're 100% wrong and you keep knowing it, why would you keep doing it, right? So he admits to something, says some others. To me, he's glossing over a few things, but remembering too, he's going back to work with young men now.
Sure he is, right? But remember, there's something else though here, and most of us probably have read the book The Game, Ken Dryden's book The Game, Once Upon a Time.
Right.
And he points out how much guys on that team hated Scotty Bowman so often. And yet they were okay with Scotty Bowman because they won championships, and so they lived with the stuff. Now, I don't know all the tactics that Scotty Bowman used. I don't know if, anything would be in today's NHL problematic. I don't know the answer to that question. But, Brendan Shanahan played for Mike Babcock, and he hired him. And Steve Yzerman played for Mike Babcock, and he chose him for the Olympic team. So, I'm not glossing over. I do think Mike Babcock has probably been hammered harder than he should have been. Not to say that he shouldn't have been criticized at all, but if the guys who were in the room thought enough of what he did to hire him for their teams when they got the power, I just look at this and I go, okay, are we making too much?
But here's the thing, though. Every one of those people that criticized Mike Babcock said exactly what you're saying. Hockey tactics, teaching, in-game decisions. Brilliant, great hockey guy, but a jerk, an a-hole, a horrible person.
And Bobby,
these are the words that we have heard from several players about Mike Babcock.
What percentage of coaches, and I don't disagree with you at all, you're right. What percentage of coaches across professional sports, all sports, would be described in those terms? I think the number is pretty high, that players would say, I hate that guy, or he did stuff that I hated.
No, Scott, you're right. I hate that guy, but not a horrible person. That's a big statement, right? I hate that guy. He's a jerk. I don't like
Bill Belichick.
That's okay. And Scotty Bowman may have been that. I don't know. But a horrible person is a different thing.
I don't know.
Yeah. Bill Belichick's in that conversation. Mike Keenan is another example in the hocky world. It's kind of John Tortorella. It's kind of funny that, many of the knives that came out for Babcock were after he got turfed. I mean, there weren't a lot of players who were, dissing him when he was still coaching. And probably that's to save their own, backside as well, especially if they're still in the league, because you never know. They might have gotten traded to the Maple Leafs and now you're playing for the coach that you just criticized. But one of the things that Babcock, I don't think, and I'll use his term, didn't pass the smell test, is his excuse that he didn't know what mental health was at the time. And I kind of found that funny because here's a guy who went to McGill University, and I think he studied sports psychology, and mental health wasn't a part of that. That seems extremely strange. So that part of the whole equation with Babs just doesn't sit right with me.
Let me throw one more, Steve, quick, and then go ahead, and then I'll finish.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say the one other line that was sent to Christine Simpson that we don't have time for today because we want to hear from you. Comment down below. The one other one that really stood out to me, and maybe we'll get into this in a future home games, because I thought this was a stunning admission that was always denied up until now. I'm writing this exactly. We went from making sure we finished last to get Austin Matthews, and then he went on to say to build it. He says, we ensured we finished last. That sounds an awful lot like not trying to win. I don't know. I don't want to be, reading between the lines, but that sounds an awful lot like the kind of thing that we despise in sports teams now, of teams tanking. Does that affect your thought on Mike Babcock? Again, comment down below all this stuff. We'd love to hear from you. Subscribe down below. Comment on your thoughts.
Can I just say 2 quick bullet points?
Yeah.
You also have to examine someone that uses the word Mike Babcock as themselves, talking to themselves in the third person. I'm always weary of that. That's one thing.
The Rich Henderson.
And just 2 locally guys, does he not remind you of a certain form, in some ways, a certain former Hamilton Tiger Cats head coach in Ken Austin? Is there not some similarities there?
Well, length of period, of course. And you guys were onto something earlier too, and so was anybody who talked about this was Scotty Bowman. You win, less scrutinized.
Yep.
You did not win in the postseason with a team that should have.
I would love to go back, and I haven't done this. I would love to go back and look and see if Franzen ever hugged Mike Babcock in a Stanley Cup celebration. And I haven't looked at the tape, but again, Steve's right. If the Leafs had won a cup, I bet you a lot of people, during his time, I bet a lot of people would have went, well, the ends justify the means. Do they? That's what we want to ask you. Comment down below. We'll talk to you soon.